Good morning. You listen to the Blaine's Roll Show, heard each day and other times as well on my website, blainesworld.net, but it's also heard on Spotify or podcast. Get more information, listen to previous shows at my website as well. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce a past guest, and she is Beth Russo, founder and director of an organization called People Will Help. And Beth, thanks for being my guest today. You can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So give them a big wave.
Thank you for having me today, Blaine. I appreciate it.
Okay, and this is Beth Russo. I'm really excited to be talking to you, Beth, because you're now undertaking kind of a new venture. And I've spoken to you in the past a couple of times, but it's kind of cool to be talking about this new venture. But before we do, let me just take you from the background again. You grew up as a kid where?
I'm actually a military kid, so I grew up all over the world,
Okay.
and I came to North Carolina for college, and pretty much fell in love with the state, and then chose Western North Carolina as my home.
And so growing up as a kid throughout all over because of the military background, did you always know you wanted to be in the nonprofit industry?
Not at all. I didn't even know about the nonprofit industry, but I did know that I always wanted to help. I have had a very strong feeling since an early age that I was brought here to make the world better for other people, animals, the environment. I'm here to help. And although it took me a while to find my way to the nonprofit world, I started volunteering at a young age, and my dad is a really great model for this. My dad was a career military man. I should say he is. He's still alive, but he spent 22 years in the military. But my dad's also always been the guy who volunteered at the fire department, was a guardian ad litem, found ways to give back, and I think that just was something that was kind of baked into my family, and I grew up with, and I'm really proud to carry on the tradition of trying to make the world a better place if I'm able to do so.
Now, as a kid, did you get involved in this as well? Were you involved in fundraising at all or helping nonprofits, church, or other
No,
organizations?
I actually thought I wanted to be a therapist, to be honest with you, Blaine. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I went and worked in a correctional facility. I worked with at-risk youth. I earned a master's degree in counseling, and I actually met my husband at a therapeutic wilderness program for young men who were being diverted from the court system. But one of the things I also learned about myself is that I feel strongly, and when I work with people who are having really difficult time, I have a hard time putting that strong boundary that you really need to stay objective with them. So I had to find another way to help, and direct service wasn't it because I don't apparently have the constitution to be able to turn it off at night, if that makes sense. So I just tried to figure out another way to provide help. I was in education. I actually taught at Brevard College's Wilderness Leadership and Experiential Education program, and we always did a ton of service projects throughout that. Curriculum. It was really fun. We'd go anything from working with middle school kids to helping elderly folks to cleaning up rivers and streams. And when I was working at Brevard College, I was elected to a position for a nonprofit organization that supported experiential education across the United States. It's called the Association for Experiential Education. And we did this, everybody was a volunteer. We had a fundraiser so we could put on a conference. And I went to my first meeting, and people said, well, hey, we got to ask for stuff. And everybody looked around, and you have sometimes that moment where everybody's just stepped back and you hadn't stepped back, so you're in the front now. And I realized nobody was going to raise their hand. And so I said, I'll try it. And it went great. I asked for a cause that I believed in, and people responded. And that was really the first time I ever did that. A couple years later, I was a mom, and I had two kids that were going into the public school system. And if you have kids in the public school system, there's a high likelihood you're going to be doing some fundraising because those schools are just not adequately funded. The teachers are often buying supplies out of their own pocket. And so again, it was at a meeting. We were doing some kind of an event to raise money so that teachers would get to be able to participate in these experiential workshops for the kids that they had in their class. And people were looking for someone to go and ask for items and for sponsorships, and no one raised their hand. I did it. And it was actually fun because, again, I'm not asking for me, but I'm asking for a cause I believe in. And I really believe that most people are wired to want to help, to want to give, to want to share, because we're an interdependent species. So anyway, I had a great time soliciting all kinds of things and monies for our kindergarten PTA, and realized that this was probably something I could do as a profession. My first dip into the nonprofit world was actually back in 2008 at Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity, and I was hired to be a volunteer manager. And I managed a 2,000 person volunteer program. These are everything from people who come and work at the restore to work in the office to work in the construction site. And I worked with lots and lots of people who were high level executives that had retired to the area, who had really valuable contributions to make because they had all this great knowledge and experience and time. And I realized if I could ask people to give me hours of their time every week and keep them motivated and excited to come in on a Monday or a Tuesday and data entry or write policies or hammer nails, I could probably ask them to give money as well. And my first official fundraising role was with Homeward Bound here in Asheville as well. Um, Again, I'm not a person who gets lets fear stop me very often, and I think most of the time I go in with the stance I'm here to do no harm, I'm here to help. So sometimes you learn the experiential way about fundraising, and I learned lots of things that don't work well, and lots of things that do.
If I can jump in, our discussion reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which I may have shared with you in the past, or you can use it in the future. But it's from a woman by the name of Shirley Chisholm. I don't know if you know who she was. She was the first Black woman to ever run for president. She was also the first Black congresswoman, I think, out of New York. And she had a quote which reminds me a lot of our discussion now. And she said, "Service is the rent we pay for living on Earth."
Mm.
And so we're here to help others. And what you just said before is really kind of cool because when you're asking people to help, it's not for you, Beth Russo, per se. You're not asking even for your kids, you're asking to help society. And I guess that if you accept that as the premise, it makes it kind of easier, I guess.
Absolutely. I think most of us are uncomfortable asking for ourselves, and we're taught not to be selfish.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but the ethics I grew up with were, you made sure everybody else had some food before you gave yourself some. Um, but I do think that, again, if you're asking because of a cause that is important and needed, it's a hopeful thing. It's an invitation for people to participate in something that's meaningful and good. And you just have to make sure that, your skin's thick enough that people say no, that's okay. There's some other cause out there that's the right match for them, and it's not this one that you might be representing. But I love that quote, and I didn't know that was who said it, so I'm glad you told me that.
Yeah. And anyway, one of the things you're also saying, which I kind of think is people should pay attention to, is that to be able to take your own skills or your skill set and then to apply it to other organizations, that's key. So you don't have to do things you may not want to do or of interest to you. But if you have a skill in marketing, you have a skill in fundraising, you have a skill in building or whatever, there's space out there in the community for you to do something. So I think that's really kind of cool. So you then, Beth, evolved through working with a whole bunch of nonprofits in Western North Carolina to then I'm interested to find out how you came up with the idea then to start your own organization, I guess, to help other people. And I love the name for it. It's a great name for it. People will help. What was the idea behind that?
Well, it was twofold. So the idea behind it, if you go look at my website, which is peoplewhohelp.org, I have a quote from not Doctor, Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers, one of his famous quotes is, when I was a little boy and something bad would happen, my mother would tell me to look for the helpers because there's always helpers. And that's the team I want to be on, the helper team. And to be honest with you, the name came out when my husband and I were talking about the idea of why I wanted to do this business because, as you gathered probably from my professional history, I'm not really a corporate girl. I'm not really trying to become rich. I just want to have a meaningful career that does something, I want to be able to live indoors and all that, but I want a meaningful career that does something good and something bigger than myself. I had the privilege of leading an organization for 3 years. And one of the things that I experienced last year was deep burnout. Which I'd never had happen before. And it's kind of an unpleasant experience, especially if you think of yourself as an energized person who always is, coming to the table with ideas and bringing people together, one of the things you start having is some apathy, and even some cynicism. And last year was a difficult year in Western North Carolina for lots of reasons. Not insignificantly, a massive hurricane that we had never seen in our region. And by the time December rolled around after that storm, I wasn't sleeping anymore. I was having stomach aches. I was really struggling to maintain my enthusiasm. I had gone to the board and told them that I just really wasn't in a position to continue to do this work because I couldn't bring my best self anymore. I can't really tell you, I don't think I have time to describe tonight to you how heartbreaking that was for me. It really felt like this huge part of myself that I just thought was baked into my rest of my professional career, that I would be in a nonprofit position. It just suddenly felt like it was like I had a cancer diagnosis or something. That might be too extreme, but it really just felt like this big part of me that I'd always relied on and thrived in was just gone.
And,
And I didn't know
and,
what burnout was.
and just so I can jump in on
I'm
that, I
sorry.
knew you when you were involved with that particular organization, and boy, did you put a lot of time and effort into it. And it just seemed you put a lot of time and effort into it, but I didn't realize, and you're mentioning it, that yeah, people talk about the corporate world suffering from burnout, but people don't think about nonprofits. You're giving to the community. How can you suffer from burnout? But you raise the reality is it's very easy to do so. And I guess it's kind of interesting. You were telling me off the air that one of the things you're trying to do is then to help people and organizations to avoid this happening.
Absolutely. Or to recover from it if they've gone through it. Um, You're right. The corporate world does talk about burnout. And
Right.
I think a lot of times people who are outside of the nonprofit, the helping professions think, oh, you're doing really good work. And that in
Right.
itself is sustaining. It is, but it's still a job. It's still work. You still have to order copy paper and you still have to make sure the Wi-Fi works. And if you have a hurricane, you have to make sure that your people are safe to come to work. All of those things still exist in the nonprofit world. The other thing that happens in the nonprofit world, though, is that salaries are lower, benefits are lower, turnover can be high, particularly amongst younger people who get into this work because they want to do something good and then find how difficult it is to sustain. I think burnout can happen in any kind of area where you're tapped out.
But are you saying, Beth, that this is new to me that people in the nonprofit world actually want to get paid also?
It's shocking.
Can you imagine? You should be giving back to society, but realize the point that people don't accept, people don't realize that these people have to make a living and have to pay mortgages and all that good stuff so that it builds up. And I guess it's unfortunate also, oftentimes tied into, at the same token, how much money you raise, so it's like almost a catch 22 that you're always running and can never get ahead, because your goal is not to make a profit per se, but your goal is to provide services. And that's kind of tough, I guess, at times, to balance the both things together. So you reached that point. I didn't realize that at the time that, so come December, you just got to the point where you had it after doing it for all these years that you wanted something different. So I guess that was the origin of People Who Help.
Absolutely. I had about a 30-minute thought process like, I'll just go to the corporate world and make a lot of money. And I had people sending me jobs. And then I was like, oh, I just can't quite do that. And this is in no way offense to anybody in the corporate world. The corporate world does great things, but I think you have to know yourself and I think you have to know where you fit. And I want to be in a place where the top most important goal is the mission. That's what a nonprofit has the luxury of doing. Its mission is its number one thing, not what its shareholders are getting. But you're right. People in this profession, they still want to send their kid to college or live in a home, might like to go on vacation some. And, one of the things, that you don't usually have in the nonprofit world, even well-funded nonprofits, is lots of additional resources. So, if you're in the corporate world and your profits are sky high, it's easy for you to write this wonderful check to all your employees, right? Here's a great bonus. Not so much in the nonprofit world, because again, the mission is our highest goal. And not to say that you can't pay people well, you should pay people well, but it's never going to be at that same level. I think as the corporate world. And I think also, in our society in general, we have a lot of pressure to perform. And for so many, I'm old enough that I remember that, like, when you left the office, you didn't, your phone wasn't sending you texts and messages and calls all night long. Like, you could literally cut it off when you left and you were done. But in today's working environment, for so many people who are doing really good work in nonprofits, they also don't have that hard shut off. So they never really get to disengage from the work they're doing. Um,
Well, it's interesting you say that because I'm thinking out loud with you. It's perhaps even more so or worse so in the nonprofit world because many of the folks in the nonprofit world are working or their organizations are 24/7 organizations. A corporate might be 9 to 5, 10, whatever the time is. But if you work for a nonprofit and you certainly work for a bunch, that they're always on call, it seems like, or you mentioned a couple too. So you never really get a chance to turn off the phone completely or get out of it. So go back to people who help then. So what was your idea behind it? Or how is people who help going to help people those, I guess, in the nonprofit area? Is that what's geared
Yeah,
at?
that's exactly what it, because I did get a lot of calls about, would you like to come take this nonprofit job? And what I just
Right.
kept saying was, I'm not at my best. I don't want to. I don't want to bring 75% Beth, if that makes sense. But I didn't want to have my both. I wanted to make sure that what I do know how to do really well, which is to engage people, to bring them in, to unite them around a cause, and then to raise the resources you need to make that cause's results stronger and more powerful. I knew I wanted to make sure that I could still offer that kind of help. And it was funny because when I left the agency that I led Edlin Charities for 3 years, and it was with pride, joy, and honor to do so. And I was very surprised when the board asked if I would be willing to consult with them and the new
All right.
executive director. So that kind of sort of was the first moment where I thought, I didn't really think about consulting as an option. And when I started to talking to some of my nonprofit friends, they were like, absolutely. And one of the things, I don't know if this statistic is true in 2025, but a year ago, the average tenure of a nonprofit development director, so the person in charge of raising money for the agency, was about 17 months.
Wow.
That's not very much time.
Right. Yeah.
And if you have that start and stop, and you know how it goes, that person leaves and their next person's not in place, so you have sort of a lag. You have all these dips in effectiveness and efficiency, especially in agencies that may not have this hugely robust, built out staff. So trying to make sure that people work smartly, people know what the most current practices and trends are, to help people fundraise ethically. That is a really big deal to me. There's lots of ways to fundraise, and there's certainly lots of ways to fundraise unethically, and helping people understand the methods and ways that they can fundraise ethically for their causes. Another part I wanted to do. And part of this too is that, I have literally raised millions of dollars, like multiple millions of dollars in my career. And if you had asked me, you were asking me about my childhood. If you had asked me as a little girl, like, think you'll be raising money, I would have been like, no way. Money is not the thing I'm interested in. And to be real honest, it's still not the thing I'm interested in. But money brings the people, it makes the building, it means that you can give the food boxes or the medical assistance or whatever that service is. So you need that money to come in to do the work. What I want people to do is to raise their money smartly too, because people spend a lot of time and they get distracted from what's most important because it's a high pressure position. And in my experience, it's a mixture of having the people skills to build relationships, to show integrity, to be a really good marketer for the agency and cause you're working on, but also lots of organization, planning, strategic thinking, and follow up. And so, a lot of times you have the personality, but they need this help, the structure and the systems that put in place to help them be a big, effective fundraiser.
So let me see if I understand this then. So people who help is trying to help folks who help others, but is it geared primarily at the development officer or are you reaching other people in the organization?
I am doing a mixture of projects, and they're all delightful, to be honest with you. I'm doing development director coaching, executive director coaching. I'm also doing some storytelling projects for agencies that want to be able to tell what they do more effectively in a way that generates some action from the audience. One of the things I also did in my nonprofit world was I was also director of communications. So I'm having the work I'm doing is related to partly to storytelling and partly to helping leaders, whether it's development directors or executive directors, focus on what they must focus on, the most important parts of their work, because it's so easy to get distracted. And when you're in the middle of something like this, it's also so easy to get led down pathways that might not be a good use of your time and energy. So my job is to help those development directors, those executive directors stay on the path that they've determined is the highest and most important part of their work, and to keep nudging them on it when they to get distracted and to hold them accountable for it too.
So what I find interesting about what you're saying is the fact that when you think about it, that people go to school and people learn lots of skills, but once you get to that point in time, like development director, there are courses you can take in it and whatnot. But once you're into it, there aren't typically, I guess, a lot of places you go for help or support or backing you up. You wouldn't even think of it. Now we can think of people who help, but other than that, like just even become a development director. Do people go to college? I guess you can go to college for that, or are
You
there
can
courses
get
you
a
can take?
nonprofit management degree, which is a relatively new
Right. Yeah.
degree, but that is out there. And to be honest, there's also some, I mean, there's the Association for Fundraising Professionals, which is a big national and regional organization that provides support. But, it's more in terms of workshops and articles and conferences. And what I provide is deeply tailored to the person and the organization I'm working with. So part of what I do when I first work with a client is really a discovery process where I get a sense of what's working, what's not working, where they are, where they need to go, and what they also where their fear points are, what they're scared of trying that they know they need to do, but they're hesitant to do. And then once I've gotten a strong sense of what I think they've told me, we sit back together, look at and make sure the goals and the practices are all the same. And then it's, like I said, deeply tailored to the person. I with the people I'm doing coaching, I'm assessing their learning
Just going to say
styles.
that. So in essence, sounds to me like you are like not you are like a coach. You are a coach to these people. And what's interesting I find about what you're saying is that yeah, there are lots of people out there doing coaching, but there aren't necessarily lots of people doing coaching in a specific area. When I won't say one of the problems I have with some people who are into coaching, but they are into coaching and they think they can coach anything for any reason and any purpose. And we've seen people who are in development work need specific kind of coaching, but would help if somebody who had been in the field or knew what they were doing, as opposed to somebody who had no background in it. So I guess that's what you're offering people.
As part of what I'm offering. So I like to think about it as being both strategic, which is more the coaching piece, and I also do. One of my friends told me they didn't like this term. I've been calling it tactical work. So I've also been hired. I have a group I'm working with that I'm helping them develop all of their work so they can apply for grants. So a lot of that is very structural work. Like I literally am looking at all of the pieces of their applications, the processes they've tried to go through to fill out to complete grants. And then a lot of times with nonprofits, they'll get a grant, but then a year later or 2 years later, when they need to report, either there's been staff turnover, so the reporting doesn't look like the application, or they didn't create systems to track their results. So then they're going back and trying to uh, what's the word I'm looking? They're trying to creatively come up with what the results were going looking backwards as opposed to measuring it and tracking it all along. So part of this is systems as well.
And you mentioned before, and I believe the figure you mentioned that 17-month figure is almost like scary. But can you imagine trying to do all this work and then somebody leaves and can you imagine somebody coming in with no background and all of a sudden have to recreate what the other person had done? Probably kind of tough to do.
Absolutely. And it also, for the person who's the donor or the sponsor, it's a little bit of a trust issue because you're like, are they going who's going to be the person I talk to in 6 months? So, ideally you have people retain and stay in these roles for 3 or 5, even 10 years. I'm not a huge fan of people staying in these roles for 10 years, but a long time. So one that the donor knows what the agency is about. And whether they talk to you, Blaine, or they talk to me as the person who represents the agency, that the pieces of work behind that person are also structured so that if they leave, the donor's not going to lose trust or faith in the mission and the cause. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and not only does it make sense, I imagine it's also a real problem because I would have the same problem too. If I'm working with you as development officer and you've helped grants and donations and whatnot, and all of a sudden after 17 months you're gone, I'm meeting somebody new, it's going to be hard to regain my trust. So I guess that's one of the other things you'll be working with people. How do you maintain the trust or how do you keep the trust of people, their donors? Because it's a tough job because boy, a development officer has a lot of publics they have to report to, or a lot of, I mean, not only a media supervisor, but their board and the donors and all these different people. It's a lot of people you have to satisfy.
Exactly. And you have to be able to stand firmly in where, where you're good at. You have to have integrity and you have to have the other part I like to do is to help agencies understand that even if this development director is the person in charge of raising money, you know, at the very least, the executive director and your board members should be as well. And you might meet board members and you might meet executive directors who will say like, oh, I don't want to do fundraising. You have to. It's part of the work.
And I've been there. You raise such a good point, Beth, because I've been involved in many nonprofits, and yet too often, and a president of a board as well, that people say just what you said, word for word. They don't want to come on board. They don't want to help raise funds. That's not their job. And I used to tell people also in marketing work I do that's it's all our job. We all have to do not only the fundraising, we have to help sell the organization. We have to market the organization as well. But tough for a development director if he or she is told that that's not their job. There are other people tell them that's not their job. And it's probably tough to convince some people that it is their job. Yeah.
And it's just it's a paradigm shift for them. And part of it is some training so that they understand it's not, you're not going to be suddenly asked to come into my living room and be like, Beth, would you give me $5,000 today? Because that's not good fundraising, unless you've had a long relationship and they knew you were coming to ask for 5,000, it's not, it shouldn't be. Good fundraising isn't transactional. It's relationship based. And you can have a relationship with lots of people in the organization, to the donor or to the sponsor or to whoever this entity is, the foundation. Even if one person's in charge of the money raising, you can have 5 people in your agency that have a meaningful relationship with that funder. And I also want to just mention, like, I've been talking about fundraising a lot because, that money doesn't make the mission move, but it's only a part of what the work is that needs to be done at nonprofit. And that's part of what I'm trying to do too, is to make sure that agencies spend their time doing the most important work for the most effective and outcome to meet their mission. Because you see people, they read some article and they want to try a pop-up t-shirt shop or something. It might work, it might not, but you can spend a lot of time and energy working on something that really isn't focused on why you're there, which is the mission.
And back to your point, you're talking about burnout. I can see it just listening to you because, boy, is there a lot involved in this job. People might think it's just, like you said, raising funds, but so much more than that, too, because you also have to get your own organization. You have to get other people to raise funds to be on your team as well. So is that something you'll be also working with, helping them run workshops to get people involved in their organizations? Or, again, you don't think of a development director doing that, but he or she has to do that as well.
A good development director is a really good motivator. I've said this to a few people, and I don't say this to everybody because not everybody's a parent and not everybody parents like I do. But to me, it's a little bit of coach. Sometimes it's you will do this by 5 o'clock today. Sometimes it's you're doing great, and I think if you try this just a little bit this way, you're going to have a better result. So part of what a good development director does is they motivate people, they engage people, they get people excited about what is happening at the agency. Sometimes they have to be the reality checker. Um, and sometimes they're the inspirational giver. It's actually quite a fun job because it has so many responsibilities. And I know we don't have much more time, but I did also want to just briefly mention the burnout piece.
Okay.
As we were talking a little bit earlier, burnout can hit anybody in any kind of a profession. And some people will have to leave the agency that they're with. They will be so burnt out that they cannot recover in a timely way to come back. But I also think that if we do more preventative work, training people what it looks like, identifying it in themselves, and starting to look at both individual practices that they can take personally, Go down, take the afternoon off and go on a hike and don't bring your phone kind of thing. But also what I'm really interested in is looking at organizational practices, because too many times I've worked at agencies that have said, like, of course your person, your mom or your family life is the most important thing. Except we need you to stay here till 7:30 tonight, and the thing starts at 7 a.m. And could your kids go pick up the donuts for you? You know what I mean? Like the intention's there, but the follow through is not. And I do think that agencies and nonprofit agencies, but all agencies can do things institutionally and organizationally to create systems to protect people from burnout. So I'm interested in it both on the individual level and helping them become more resilient and resourceful. But I'm also really interested in the organizational level and helping them strategize and plan systems that they can put into place that take care of the people that do the work. Because the work that nonprofits do it's not a widget factory. You can't automate it. I don't think AI is ever going to be a fundraiser. I don't think AI is ever going to bring in volunteers. So I think that's the other thing I just want to make sure I mention is I'm just very interested in making sure that organizations set themselves up for success by building in structures and support and systems to care for the people who do all the work.
You mentioned 17 months as the kind of the average range. I'm just curious on the other extreme, what's the longest you've seen development directors stay? Are there any people staying it for 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah, I can think of some people here in town actually. Um, a gentleman who just passed away in
Right.
the Asheville area, Jim Louder, who I had the pleasure of working with both at Asheville Habitat and Homeward Bound. Jim was a development director for many years. He had been an executive director in San Francisco, and then moved to the East Coast to be near his parents, and moved into this role. And I think he was another man who would have never said, "Oh, I'm going to be a fundraiser when I grow up." But he found it was the way that he could lift the mission up. And I always remember when I went to work with him at Homeward Bound, and he said, "Beth, I think I found my life's purpose." You know, and the reason that Asheville has Compass Village that houses like 85 formerly homeless people is because somebody like Jim Louder and other people who followed him, but Jim is the starter on this one, put his heart and soul into raising millions of dollars to build this facility out. So there are people who will be in those roles forever. And I think a lot of times they're able to do that if their agencies are set up so that they get the time and the support they need to
And so
stay.
it seems to me also that aside from reaching out to development directors, you should also be reaching, I'm sure, knowing who you are, to the agency itself, including the executive director, some of the key players in the agency. Because then you were saying about some people saying it's not their job to raise funds, but it is job. And I guess you have to everybody in the organization has to buy into that fact, or it's not going to work. If an executive director says, I don't want to do it, somebody's going to have to do it. Beth, a couple things. One, if folks want to get in touch with you or find out specifically more about people who help, what's the best bet?
Well, the easiest to go to my website, peoplewhohelp.org. There's some basic information about what I do and who I am. My phone number and email are on there. Everybody who's interested in talking to me, I do a free consult initial meeting with. I think the other part about working together as a consultant is making sure we're the right match. And I don't want people to hire me unless they think that I'm the right person for them, and vice versa. But that's the easiest way. I'm also on LinkedIn as People Who Help. If you'd like to learn more about me personally on LinkedIn, look for Beth Russo.
And I guess the final question would be, um, who should contact you, or how does an organization decide that it's time to contact you and you're the person to contact? Who would you recommend?
Well, I'm thinking all of my clients have come to me through word of mouth. Somebody told them I was doing this. And I haven't done a tremendous amount of advertising or marketing yet. But I think what I would tell people is that if you have an idea that you may be able to improve your systems for your organization, if you think you as an individual employee, you could use some help in honing your craft and your skill, call me. And again, we'll spend a little bit of time together talking, see if it's a fit. I do a follow-up proposal with what I think is the meat or if you're vegetarian, the tofu of the of the work that needs doing. And then and then we talked about length of time of service and price points. I really, like I said, I want to make sure that people get the help that they need. It's if you reach out to me and we have an hour-long talk, it's the only thing you've lost is an hour of your time. And I think at the end of it, you'll have a good sense of whether I can bring something deliverable, actionable, and practical. That's the other thing I want to mention. I believe in practical solutions. I love people who develop theories and I love that. But I'm a girl who wants her boots on the ground and a hammer in her hand. And so I want to, deliver practical things that people can use pretty quickly.
It almost seems to me, based on what you're saying, that somebody would have an organization would have nothing to lose by at least giving you that initial call. So
Yes.
anyway,
Only an hour of their time.
I'd like to thank you, Beth Russo, for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World webcast. Also, like to thank my producer, Cappy Setti. Hopefully, one day or somewhere along the line, we'll actually get to bump into each other in person. That'd be great. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.